Hello and welcome to The Climate Skeptic. I'm your host, Laurie Wastel, an associate editor at the Daily Skeptic. Now, one of the major problems with British politics today is that the people who make the decisions that affect our lives are no longer accountable to the electorate. Nowhere is that more obvious than with the costly net zero crusade, which is driven by the Climate Change Committee. We're supposed to believe can't be wrong about these things because it's run by independent experts. So why have these green zealot boffins been allowed to have so much power? Earlier this year, I discussed this with the Institute of Economic Affairs' Lord Frost, and I started by asking him why our political class is so obsessed with the idea of independence.
I mean, the central bank independence is the kind of locus classicus of this, that you get better control of inflation because central banks are not bound to the political cycle and can take technocratic decisions in the wider interest. And I think there's some kind of evidence that is the case, obviously, if you look back over the last 30 years. Now, that's only okay if there's some kind of error correction mechanism in the system. And what we've developed in that and in other areas is, there's no error correction mechanism. The Bank of England could get monetary policy disastrously wrong, see inflation go up to 10% and so on. And we're just expected to say that was a mistake, but we trust the same people to do it right in future. There's no institutional clearing out. There's no ability of the democratic bit of the system to kind of say, OK, we need to do things. We need to organise ourselves differently. We need to maybe set different targets. We need to have different ranges of views expressed in monetary policy. All that is now somehow regarded as illegitimate and a sort of Trumpian kind of tampering with independent institutions. And the independence of institutions is sort of, to me, it's kind of contractual independence. It's like it's independence to do the job right. If you're kind of outsourcing the service of inflation control, and if those people who you have outsourced inflation control to fail to do it, then you get another bunch of people in to do it. That's how the process works. You can't set up independent institutions that are independent forever and just able to kind of invent what they do with no connection to the democratic normal mechanisms. And that we seem to me to be at risk of going down that road in some areas and disempowering the government and the democratic institutions.
Quite. And of course, sort of contained within that at least idea of independence is that it will be independent of ideology, they'll be sort of coolly rational and so on. But if we take one particular vaunted independent institution of the Climate Change Committee, say,
yes.
I mean, this is not a non-ideological institution. It's one that's laser focused on this one goal of essentially reworking the entire British economy in order to change the world's weather, which is, well, I would say is not really possible and is certainly not practical. And yet, and we're supposed to assume that these people are merely just dispassionate experts who have no skin in the game.
Yes, and it is, of course, a fallacy to say that, for most fields of activity, there isn't only one way of doing it, and to say that you can get an expert who has the best possible way of doing advancing this cause, and this is the only way, and the only thing to do is kind of get behind what they say, is obviously mistaken. And we're now seeing the consequences of that in net zero. We had that for a time in COVID and the lockdowns before everybody started saying, "Hang on, maybe it isn't quite like you say." And that
independent sage.
Yes, yes. Well, that's another example. So I think. Your government is outsourcing its own judgment, and if it's almost kind of neutering itself. Any government that now wants to pursue a different policy on net zero has to expect it's going to be criticised by the Climate Change Committee unless it abolishes it, or at least puts completely different people on it, and then it will be accused of sort of Trumpian demolition of independent institutions and the governing order, and that's the trap that we've fallen into, because we've forgotten what it's like to run a democracy that can actually do things.
And is there a danger that this becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, where you sort of say, well, these decisions should be out of the hands of elected politicians because they're subject to populism and the sort of supposedly erratic and unwise whims of the electorate? They do that, they hive off sovereignty in that way, and then they suddenly find that they don't really know what they're doing, and they can't do anything without these institutions.
That's right. I mean, of course, that was a big part of the appeal of EU membership to a lot of people, that it outsourced decisions to the technocracy in Brussels. We couldn't really influence them except to the margin. We could only implement them. And all the right thinking people were in charge all the time, and you just had to get with the programme, and that happens at national level as well. It is just the sudden collapse of that order, as far as the EU is concerned, has really exposed our governing establishment as unable to think its way out of a paper bag in some areas, and or it just doesn't know what to do. It can't define the national interests, and it's sort of, it's like a rabbit in the headlights faced with international challenges, and it seems unable to change its own kind of governing order and the way it runs its own country in the interests of the people in it. It's just kind of forgotten how to do it somehow over the years.
If after 3 decades of Blairism, our state is lousy with unaccountable bodies like the Climate Change Committee, surely what we need now is a Great Repeal Act. In the autumn, I put that question to the Conservative MP for Windsor, Jack Rankin.
Well, look, the greatest question in politics across millennia is the size of the state, right? It's do you have a smaller state, let's say in the modern world, the American model, lower taxes, weaker public services, or do you have a Scandinavian type state where you have higher taxes, higher state, more wraparound kind of welfare system? And that's the oldest political question in the book, and I'm on the centre right, and I generally think that it should be smaller and that individuals should be in question. But what we seem to have managed to construct in the United Kingdom is we seem to have Scandinavian taxes and American public services, right? Just think about that.